This is HL content for section 3.1, International Trade, with the focus being on trade protection. We've already seen absolute advantage and comparative advantage in this section. Now we'll look at calculating the effects of a tariff, calculating the effects of a quota, and calculating the effects of subsidies to local producers. Now, before we start, I want you to test yourself and draw a tariff diagram. Make sure you draw it nice and big. Okay, you should have come up with something like this. We have our domestic demand, I should say, domestic supply. We have the world supply curve. Now this is lower than the domestic equilibrium price, which is the reason, of course, that the country is trying to protect the industry from trade. Then we have the world supply curve plus tariff. This will be higher. We assume that these world supply curves are perfectly elastic horizontal lines as the world industry is so much larger than the domestic industry. What's going to make this high level content is the calculations. So we'll add some numbers in. Here we go. We're now looking at the baseball bat industry of Balmacedan. The domestic equilibrium price would be $20, while the world price is $13. The glorious leader, President Baum, wants to protect the baseball bat producers from trade. So what he does is he implements a tariff of $2 per bat. So the world price plus tariff is now $15. Make sure you've added the numbers to this diagram. You'll need to do this so you can follow along through the calculations. We'll now look at the effects on various stakeholders. There's 4 stakeholders we have to consider here: domestic consumers, domestic producers, foreign producers, and the government. Starting with domestic consumers, you may be asked to calculate consumer expenditure before and after a tariff is imposed. Pause and work these out yourselves. We see that before the tariff, consumers spend $208,000 on baseball bats, whereas after the tariff, they spend $210,000. On the face of it, this isn't a large increase, $2,000. In some cases, total expenditure could decrease. It depends on the price elasticity of demand. Think back to the total revenue test that we did last year. Now, it's really important that you don't make the common mistake of evaluating the effect on consumers by whether their expenditure has increased or decreased. We know that they are worse off because they are paying a higher price for the same product. It's as simple as that. Now for domestic producers, the effect is clear. They were selling 8,000 bats at $13 each, making $104,000. Now they can sell 10,000 bats at $15, a higher price. And they're selling more. They now make $46,000 more revenue after the tariff has been put in place. They're the winners here. Foreign producers lose the total loss in exports, 4,000 times the world price. Now remember, the foreign producers do not get the new higher domestic price of $15 as they pay a tariff. So the government makes that money. So foreign producers still only own $13, but there are now 4,000 exports, so they get that revenue. But you can see they lose quite a lot in this case. Onto the government. Before the tariff, the government makes no tariff revenue because there's no tariff. After the tariff, they make $2 per imported baseball bat. So remember, it's not the total amount. They only make the tariff on the imported baseball bats. They don't get that tariff from the domestic producers. There are now 4,000 bats imported, so $8,000 is added to the budget bottom line, ceteris paribus. Now, if you learn this content well, I'm sure you'll hit a home run in the exams. Ooh, onto a quota. Don't know what I've done with the diagram there. Again, test yourself and draw up a quota diagram. So pause now. I'm sure it looks something like this. Again, we'll add numbers because that's what makes it higher level. There we go. In the original Bormastan market for hoverboards at the world price of $250, Bormastan produces supply 4,000 and a further 5,000 are imported. President Borm wants to protect the local hoverboard industry from competition and therefore legislates that no more than 3,000 hoverboards can be imported into Bormastan per year. This causes a rightward shift of the supply curve. So by 3,000 hoverboards. We can see that the domestic industry can make 4,000 and 3,000 can be imported. But this leaves a shortage of 2,000 hoverboards, as 9,000 boards are demanded at this price of $250. So this shortage enacts the price mechanism. It forces the price to rise until a new equilibrium is reached at $280 and 8,000 boards. If there are now 8,000 boards being bought, and we know that only 3,000 can be imported, then the domestic industry must now be producing 5,000 boards, which they are willing and able to do at this higher price. Again, make sure you have a copy of this so you can follow along with the calculations. Again, we're looking at the four stakeholders. They're the same: domestic consumers, domestic producers, foreign producers, and the government. Okay, consumers. Before the quota, they're spending $2.25 million. $250 times 9,000 boards. So again, in this case, total expenditure is less. But it's important that we look beyond the numbers. The fact remains that consumers are paying a higher price and getting fewer boards for that expenditure. So we know that they are worse off. That's not in question. Looking at producers, we see that they gain. This is what we expected. They receive a higher price and they sell a larger quantity. So in this case, their revenue increases by $400,000 due to the quota. Foreign producers, before the quota, $1.25 million, they're selling 5,000 at $250. Now, this is a bit different. They still do sell fewer hoverboards, but they do get the higher price in this case, as they have the license to import them into Bormastan. In this case, foreign producer revenue drops considerably, as you can see. However, if the demand for the product is inelastic, it could be that the revenue actually increases. Again, think back to the total revenue test. On the government, quotas have no effect on government revenue. Revenue equals zero. After, revenue equals zero. Now, the last type of protection we look at here is subsidies to domestic producers. So, as this one is so easy to draw from memory, I'm just going to take out that step, and there it is. Now again, we're going to switch to numbers because we're doing calculations. So we're going to look at the market for pool noodles in Bormastan. At the world price of $20, consumers demand 17,000 pool noodles. But Bormastan producers are only willing and able to make 10,000. President Borm decides to subsidize the industry so that more are made locally and fewer need to be imported. A subsidy of $5 is implemented, increasing the amount of pool noodles local producers are willing to supply to 13,000. This means that imports have reduced from 7,000 to 4,000. Back to the stakeholders. Domestic consumers, they're not affected. They pay and receive the same as before. So they pay the same price and they receive the same number. As far as they know, nothing's changed. The only difference is where the product has come from. Now, domestic producers win out here. They receive $20 from consumers and now an extra $5 from the government. In addition, they're now selling a greater quantity, so revenue increases quite dramatically here, as you can see from the numbers. Foreign producers, they lose out, they lose exports. The quantity of exports has dropped from 7,000 to 4,000, so their total revenue of course decreases. They're still receiving the same price as before. And the effect on government, before the subsidy, they're not spending anything, but after the subsidy, they're spending $5 for each locally made pool noodle. So that adds up to $65,000. So they're affected quite significantly there. That's all we have to go through in this session. So as always, make sure you're ready to work through the exercises in class. I hope you haven't found this too difficult.